Well, first let me say Cuba si bloquee o no.
That's right.
The People's Organization for Progress for years has been calling for an end to the blockade of Cuba. It's unjust, it's inhumane, and it's taking a terrible toll on the people in Cuba. So we're working to do what we can to pressure our government to lift the blockade. In terms of the differences between the police issue in the United States and the police issue in Cuba, I think it has a lot to do because the two countries have two different types of social systems. We have a capitalist system and Cuba has a socialist system. And under this system, the police historically were in service of the capitalist class. With regard to police brutality in black people, Herbert Apteker, in his book Slave Rebellions in Colonial America, points out that modern police forces as we know them evolved out of slave patrols. So one of the reasons we're having the problem that we have with the police is because of the historical role the police have served in the oppression and repression of black people. During the era of slavery, the police enforced the laws that were on the books, about slavery. During the era of Jim Crow, when you look at most of the history books and you look at the documentaries, yes, you'll see some pictures of the Klan, but most of the pictures you'll see about civil rights workers being brutalized is by the police. The police were the agents of repression that helped to hold the system of apartheid in this country, which was called Jim Crow, hold it in place. So how do you keep people in bondage? How do you keep them in slavery? How do you keep them under an apartheid system? You have to do it with violence because people will naturally rebel against oppression. And this has been the historical role that the police have served and continue to serve. In this most contemporary era, we all know that the police, their role is to protect property, but their role is also to maintain the status quo. I mean, when we look at the people who are protesting in this country now against the genocide going on in Palestine, protesters are being beaten by police. When millions of people all over this country were protesting the murder of George Floyd, many of those protesters were attacked and beaten by the police. So the police historically have served a kind of counterinsurgency role. Under what one might call normal conditions, it's a soft kind of counterinsurgency. But then when the masses of people rise up, it's hard. I was alive in Newark in 1967. During the 50s and 60s, police were notorious. They were notorious. When they beat the cab driver whose beating led to the Newark Rebellion of 1967, what people call the riots, when they took him into the police station, most people assumed that he was already dead. That's what really started the protest. The protest in front of the police station, where the police poured out, when the people were protesting the beating of the cab driver, police poured out of the police station, started attacking the protesters, and that's what triggered the rebellion. In Newark in 1967 and in many other cities in 1967 and 1968. So a lot of why the police are different in the United States than they are in Cuba has a lot to do with the historical conditions in this country and the historical conditions in Cuba. I mean, look, both had similar conditions in both Cuba and the United States. The forces of the state, which at that time would be like the colonial army and imperial armies, they exterminated the indigenous peoples. They exterminated them in North America. They exterminated them in Cuba. And then they brought enslaved Africans to do the work on the plantations and enrich the slave owners and the plantation owners, you know. But what happened, you know, eventually people rose up and abolished slavery in the United States, and slavery was abolished in Cuba. But it took what? It took revolutions in both places, you know, to abolish slavery. But the difference was, under the socialist revolution, you know, Jim Crow was outlawed, because Jim Crow did exist too. Segregation did exist in Cuba, but under the socialist government, it was brought to an end. But here, Jim Crow continued until the Civil Rights Movement brought it to an end, you know, with the passage of the Civil Rights Act and all the other civil rights legislation. So historical conditions, the type of social system, the type of economic system, the type of political system, the type of state that exists in both countries has to do with the type of behavior exhibited by the police in both countries. Whereas in Cuba, it is more humane, whereas here, you know, we're still fighting modern day lynching. Just this morning, I was listening to a discussion, you know, and they were talking about how after the Civil War, up until the 1940s, there were waves of lynching in the United States, you know, and a lot of those lynchings were carried out by the Klan and, you know, white mobs, white racist mobs. But then what happened, you know, in the after World War II, a lot of those lynchings continued, but not by the Klan. The lynchings were by the police. I mean, what was the murder of George Floyd except a lynching? It was a lynching. It was a lynching that happened before our very eyes. That's why the whole world rose up, because this young woman videotaped and FaceTimed while it was happening, and we all saw a murder happen before. It was a lynching. You know, Michael Brown, a lynching. Tamir Rice, a lynching. Right up here in Orange, New Jersey, Earl Faison, a lynching. Carl Dorsey, shot dead. He was unarmed. What was that except a kind of a lynching? You know, whether, you know, they have on white robes or whether they have on blue uniforms, the outcome is the same. So that's why we are struggling here against police brutality. Let me tell you something. We're fighting police brutality, but we understand that this fight is bigger than police brutality. We have to change this whole socio-economic system. We have to have a revolutionary transformation here in the United States of America.